In the gleaming interrogation chamber of the Galactic Security Council's headquarters on Station 09, Chief Investigator ZYX Dal's crystalline appendages flickered with frustration. The prisoner before them, a Nexilian from the Outer Rim, hadn't spoken a word in 15 standard cycles. This was unprecedented in ZYX Dal's 3 centuries of service. The Nexilian sat motionless, its iridescent scales reflecting the chamber's harsh light. Unlike most prisoners who showed signs of stress under the advanced psychological techniques of the Council, this one remained unnaturally calm. The standard neural probes had failed. The telepathic scanners had encountered only static. Even the legendary truth seekers of Meridian 7 had withdrawn in confusion. Chief Investigator, Subcommander Rail, entered the observation room, her holographic form shimmering with urgency. The Council demands progress. The terrorist cell's deadline approaches, and we still don't know their target. ZYX Dal's crystalline structure darkened with concern. The Nexilian was their only lead to preventing what intelligence suggested would be the deadliest attack in Council space since the Crimson Wars. 3 populated systems could be at risk, with billions of lives hanging in the balance. "We've tried everything in our arsenal," ZYX Tal responded, their thoughts transmitting directly into Rail's consciousness. "Every species interrogation techniques, every psychological approach in our databases." "Not everything," Rail's holographic form pulsed thoughtfully. "There's one species we haven't consulted. They're new to the galactic community, barely a century since first contact, but their methods, they're different." ZYX Dal's crystalline structure vibrated with skepticism. "The humans? They're practically children in galactic terms. What could they possibly know about advanced interrogation?" "That's exactly why we should consider them," Rail countered. "They think differently. Their planet's isolation forced them to develop unique approaches to understanding behavior. And their history." She paused, her holographic form flickering with something akin to admiration. "Their history is filled with examples of solving problems that seemed impossible to others." The mention of humans stirred something in ZYX Dal's memory banks. Reports had been circulating about their unconventional successes in diplomatic missions, their ability to forge connections with species that had previously been considered incompatible with Council cooperation. "The Council won't like it," ZYX Tal warned. "Bringing an underdeveloped species into a matter of this sensitivity. The Council won't like failure even more," Rail responded. "And I've already identified a candidate. Sarah Chin, from their Earth Defense Force. She has a remarkable record in crisis negotiation and criminal psychology." ZYX Dal's crystals pulsed with resigned agreement. Time was running out, and conventional methods had failed. Perhaps it was time for an unconventional solution. They transmitted their authorization, and Rail's hologram brightened with approval. "I'll make the arrangements immediately," she said, her form beginning to fade. "But Chief Investigator, there's something else you should know about humans. They have a saying, the best way to understand someone is to walk a mile in their shoes. I don't fully understand what shoes have to do with it, but I believe it speaks to their unique approach to empathy." As Rail's hologram disappeared, ZYX Tal turned back to observe the Nexilian prisoner. In all their centuries of service, they had never considered bringing in a species so new to galactic civilization for such a crucial task. But perhaps that was exactly what they needed, someone unburdened by centuries of conventional wisdom, someone who might see what their advanced technologies and experienced interrogators had missed. In the silence of the observation room, ZYX Tal watched as the prisoner continued its motionless vigil. Soon, they would discover whether humanity's reputation for solving the impossible was deserved. The fate of billions might depend on it. Sarah Chin stepped out of the quantum transport pod, fighting back a wave of nausea that accompanied faster-than-light travel. Station 09 stretched before her, its crystalline architecture unlike anything human engineering had yet achieved. After 15 years in Earth's Defense Force handling the most challenging negotiations and interrogations, she thought she'd seen everything. She was wrong. "Lieutenant Chin," a melodic voice resonated in her mind as Subcommander Rail's holographic form materialized. "Your reputation precedes you. Though I must admit, some council members are skeptical about involving a human in this matter." Sarah smiled, adjusting the neural translator at her temple. Skepticism is healthy. It means people are thinking critically. But right now, you need results more than you need certainty. As they walked through the station's pristine corridors, Rail briefed Sarah on the previous attempts to interrogate the Nexilian. The failed neural probes, the confused telepaths, the sophisticated psychological techniques that had yielded nothing but silence. What interests me, Sarah said, studying the holographic records, is that you've tried to break through the prisoner's defenses. But sometimes, the best way in is to let someone walk through the front door. They arrived at the observation room, where Chief Investigator ZYXDAL's crystalline form towered over the human. Sarah felt the weight of centuries of experience in the alien's presence, but she maintained her composure. In her line of work, confidence was as important as competence. You believe you can succeed where our most advanced methods have failed? ZYXDAL's thoughts carried a hint of doubt. I believe I can try something different, Sarah replied. Your methods are sophisticated, but they all share one assumption, that information must be extracted. Humans learned long ago that sometimes the most valuable information is freely given. Sarah studied the Nexilian through the observation window. The iridescent scales, the perfect stillness, the apparent serenity. Tell me, she asked, has anyone tried to simply talk to them? Not as a prisoner, but as a person. The silence that followed told her everything. I'd like to go in. No neural probes, no scanners, no telepathic monitoring. Just two beings having a conversation. Impossible. ZYXDAL's crystals flashed with alarm. The security protocols have failed, Sarah interrupted gently. Sometimes, the riskiest option is to keep doing what isn't working. You called me here because humans think differently. Let me prove why. After heated deliberation, they agreed to Sarah's terms, though with significant safety measures in place. As she prepared to enter the interrogation chamber, Rail transmitted one last thought. The Nexilian hasn't moved or spoken in 15 cycles. What makes you think they'll respond to you? Sarah checked her pocket, feeling the small object she'd brought from Earth. Because sometimes, the key to understanding isn't in our differences, but in what we share. The door to the interrogation chamber hissed open. Sarah walked in, her footsteps echoing in the sterile room. The Nexilian remained motionless, but Sarah noticed something the advanced sensors had missed, a slight, almost imperceptible shift in the pattern of their scales. She sat down across from the prisoner, placed a small wooden puzzle box on the table between them, and began to solve it slowly, methodically, without saying a word. Minutes passed in silence, but Sarah continued working on the puzzle, her movements deliberate and calm. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the Nexilian scales rippled with what Sarah recognized as curiosity. She smiled inwardly but kept her focus on the puzzle. In the observation room, ZYXDAL and Rail watched in astonishment as the prisoner's head tilted slightly, their first voluntary movement in 15 cycles. Sarah knew that breaking through wouldn't be easy, that there were still countless barriers to overcome. But in that small movement, she saw what centuries of advanced alien technology had missed, the universal language of curiosity, the bridge that could connect even the most distant of minds. The real interrogation was about to begin, but not in any way the Galactic Security Council had expected. For 3 hours, Sarah sat with the puzzle box, solving and scrambling it repeatedly. The Nexilian's attention remained fixed on her hands, their scales shifting in patterns that mimicked the movements of the wooden pieces. In the observation room, the council representatives had grown restless, but Sarah knew patience was her strongest ally. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. My grandmother gave me this puzzle when I was young. Said it belonged to her grandmother before her. Simple wood, no electronics, no neural interfaces. Just logic and patience. She placed the completed puzzle on the table. Would you like to try? The Nexilian scales rippled with colors Sarah hadn't seen before. Slowly, deliberately, they reached for the puzzle box. Their 6-fingered hand moved with unexpected grace as they examined the ancient Earth artifact. Your species values efficiency, Sarah continued, watching as the Nexilian began manipulating the puzzle pieces. Advanced technology, telepathic communication, neural interfaces, all designed to eliminate wasted time and effort. But sometimes, the longest path leads to unexpected destinations. The prisoner's hands stopped moving, their multifaceted eyes fixed on Sarah with an intensity that would have unnerved most humans. But Sarah had spent years learning to read alien body language, and she saw something familiar in that gaze: recognition. "You're not what they expected," the Nexilian spoke for the first time, their voice a haunting melody of harmonics. "A species so young, yet you understand what the Council has forgotten." In the observation room, ZYXDAL's crystalline form vibrated with shock. Rael's hologram flickered intensely as she recorded every word. "And what have they forgotten?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. The Nexilian scale shifted to a deep, resonant blue. That complexity can hide in simplicity. That sometimes, the most dangerous weapon is not a quantum cannon or a neural disruptor, but an idea. Sarah nodded, understanding dawning. "The attack your people are planning. It's not a conventional weapon, is it?" My silence was not defiance, the Nexilian continued, their fingers still working the puzzle box. It was protection. The Council's methods of interrogation, their probes, their scanners, their telepathic invasions, they would have found the information they sought, but they would have triggered the very catastrophe they hoped to prevent. The puzzle box clicked, its sections rearranging in a pattern Sarah had never seen before. The Nexilian placed it back on the table, completed but transformed. "We placed quantum triggers in the minds of thousands of Council citizens," they revealed. Any attempt to extract the information forcefully would activate them, causing a cascade of neural collapses across 3 systems. The Council's own desperation to prevent an attack would have caused one. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "But you're telling me this freely. Why?" The Nexilian scale shifted to a color she couldn't quite define. "Because you showed me something I didn't expect to find in this age of technological marvels: wisdom. Your puzzle box carries the history of your species' evolution of thought. In its simplicity, I see the reflection of a truth my people have forgotten." In the observation room, alarms began blaring as the station's quantum sensors detected massive energy fluctuations throughout Council space. But these weren't from attacks, they were from quantum triggers deactivating, one by one. Sometimes, the Nexilian said, their voice carrying a note of what might have been hope, "The most powerful change comes not from forcing reality to bend to our will, but from learning to see it through new eyes." Sarah understood then why the human approach had succeeded where advanced alien technology had failed. It wasn't despite their relative primitive status in galactic society, but because of it. Humans still remembered what it meant to connect without technology, to build bridges with nothing but patience and understanding. The crisis wasn't over. There were still questions to be answered, conspiracies to unravel, and wounds to heal between civilizations. But in that moment, as Sarah sat across from an alien who had chosen to trust in human wisdom, she realized that perhaps humanity's greatest contribution to galactic society wouldn't be their technology or their military might, but their ability to remember the simple truths that advanced civilizations had forgotten. In the hours following the Nexilian's revelation, Station 09 transformed into a hub of frantic activity. Sarah sat in the central command chamber with ZYXTAL and Rael, watching as holographic displays showed the ripple effects of their discovery spreading across Council space. The quantum triggers were just the beginning, the Nexilian, who had finally identified themselves as Vexnor, explained. Their scales now shimmered with a mix of urgency and regret. They were meant to distract from a far greater threat. Sarah noticed how Vexnor's hands kept returning to the puzzle box, fingers tracing its edges as if drawing comfort from its simple complexity. "You're not really a terrorist, are you?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "I am part of an organization called the Threshold Guard." Vexnor's scales rippled with what Sarah had learned to recognize as pride. "For millennia, we have protected the galaxy from threats that the Council refuses to acknowledge." ZYXDAL's crystalline form darkened. "Impossible. The Council's archives contain all known threats to galactic civilization." "All known threats," Vexnor emphasized. "But what of the unknown? What of the spaces between spaces, where your advanced sensors cannot reach?" They turned to Sarah. Your species understands this concept better than most. You have a word for it. Blind spots. Sarah leaned forward. What's coming? We call them the Void Weavers. Vexnor's voice dropped to a whisper. They exist in the quantum foam between dimensions, feeding on technological complexity. The more advanced a civilization becomes, the more visible it is to them. The more appetizing. The holographic displays around them flickered, as if in response to the name. Rail's form stabilized them with a thought. If such beings existed, our quantum arrays would have detected them. Just as your neural probes detected my true thoughts? Vexnor challenged. Your technology is your weakness. The quantum triggers were a test to see if there was anyone in the council who could solve a problem without relying on advanced systems. Only then could we risk sharing the truth. Sarah understood with sudden clarity. Because any technological attempt to fight these Void Weavers would only make them stronger. Precisely, Vexnor's scales brightened. This is why we chose you, Sarah Chen. Your species still remembers how to think without neural enhancers, how to feel without emotional regulators, how to solve problems with nothing but your native intelligence. ZYXDAL's crystals pulsed with skepticism, but also with growing concern. You said the quantum triggers were a distraction. From what? The Void Weavers have already begun their infiltration, Vexnor revealed. They've infected the Council's quantum communication network. Every message sent, every neural link established, creates new pathways for them to spread. In 7 standard cycles, they will have sufficient presence to begin their consumption of our reality. The command chamber fell silent. Sarah looked around at the advanced technology surrounding them, technology that now represented not progress, but vulnerability. The Council had spent millennia advancing toward the stars, never considering that there might be things in the darkness that were attracted to their light. How do we stop them? Rail asked, her holographic form condensing with determination. We don't, Sarah replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. At least, not with quantum weapons or neural networks. She held up the puzzle box. We need to think simpler. More fundamental. Vexnor's scales rippled with approval. The Threshold Guard has spent centuries preparing for this moment, gathering knowledge of ancient technologies, studying the patterns of civilizations that survived first contact with the Void Weavers. But we needed something more. We needed a species that hadn't yet forgotten how to operate without technological enhancement. A species that could help bridge the gap between the advanced and the fundamental. Sarah felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. Humanity, the newcomers to galactic society, might just be the key to saving it. Not because of their advancement, but because of their relative lack of it. Sometimes, she realized, being behind could actually mean being ahead in ways no one expected. We have 7 cycles, she said, standing up. And we're going to need help from both sides, the most advanced minds in the Council, and the most fundamental thinkers humanity has to offer. She looked at the puzzle box one last time before setting it down. It's time to remember how to solve problems the old way. Station 09 had never seen anything like it. In the vast central atrium, now cleared of its quantum interfaces and neural networks, humans and aliens worked side by side, using methods that would have seemed primitive just days ago. Holographic displays were replaced by physical models. Neural links gave way to verbal communication. Technology was stripped to its most basic, essential functions. Sarah stood at the center of it all, coordinating between Council scientists and human specialists who had been quantum transported from Earth. Dr. Maya Patel, a theoretical physicist from Mumbai, worked with crystalline beings from ZYXDAL's homeworld, using chalk on enormous black surfaces to map mathematical patterns of dimensional interaction. Captain James Wong, a retired submarine commander, shared expertise on operating in environments where advanced sensors were worse than useless. The Void Weavers exploit complexity, Vexnor explained to the assembled team, their scales shifting in educational patterns. Every quantum calculation, every neural network connection, creates ripples they can follow. But simple, analog methods are invisible to them. Like trying to hack a pencil, Dr. Patel added, her chalk scratching across the surface as she refined her calculations. You can't hack what isn't connected. Time was running out. 5 cycles had passed, and the signs of Void Weaver infiltration were becoming visible even to unaugmented eyes. Throughout Council space, quantum systems were experiencing inexplicable failures. Neural networks reported phantom data. Reality itself seemed to shimmer at the edges. "We've mapped their infiltration patterns," Captain Wong announced, standing before a physical model of Council space built from materials found in the station's historical archives. "They're not random. They're following the most heavily used quantum communication channels, like submarines following underwater thermal currents." Sarah watched as he traced the patterns with his hand. They're not just following the channels, she realized. They're being drawn to them. Like moths to a flame. She turned to Vexnor. "Your people survived first contact with them." "How?" "By going dark," Vexnor replied. "By returning to basic technologies until the Void Weavers passed us by." But the Council spans too many systems. A complete shutdown would cause chaos, death on an unimaginable scale. "Then we don't shut down," Sarah said, an idea forming. "We light up." Dr. Patel's chalk stopped moving. "Of course," she whispered. "If they're drawn to quantum complexity, we give them so much complexity that they can't process it," Sarah finished. "Not across the network, but in one location. A quantum singularity of information." ZYXDAL's crystals pulsed with understanding. A trap. The next hours were a blur of activity. Council engineers, working without their usual neural enhancements, reconfigured the station's quantum cores. Human programmers wrote basic code that would run on simple, isolated systems. The Threshold Guard shared ancient wisdom about the nature of dimensional boundaries. But as the 6th cycle drew to a close, they hit a problem. "The quantum lure will work," Dr. Patel explained, her face grave. "But someone has to be here to activate it. The timing has to be perfect, and the activation sequence has to be done manually. Anything automated would be detected and consumed. The Void Weavers will be drawn to the quantum surge," Vexnor added. "Whoever stays will face the full force of their dimensional transition. No organic being has ever survived direct contact." Silence fell over the atrium. Sarah looked at the wooden puzzle box, still sitting where she'd left it days ago. She picked it up, feeling its weight, its simple complexity. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "Sarah, no." Rael's holographic form flickered with distress. "The probability of survival is not zero," Sarah interrupted. "And sometimes that's enough." She turned to address the gathered beings. "Humanity is the youngest species here. We don't have neural enhancements or quantum consciousness. Our brains still process reality the old way, through chemical and electrical signals that the Void Weavers might not even recognize as intelligence. If anyone has a chance of surviving direct contact, it's a human." She looked at each of them in turn, ZYXTAL, Rael, Vexnor, her fellow humans. "Get everyone else off the station. Evacuate to the minimum safe distance. I'll handle the activation sequence." As the evacuation began, Sarah sat down at the manual control station they'd built. The puzzle box sat beside her, a reminder of the power of simple things. In less than an hour, she would either save galactic civilization or join the ranks of those consumed by the spaces between spaces. She began her final preparations, knowing that humanity's greatest test was about to begin. Sarah sat alone in Station 09's control center, surrounded by deliberately primitive technology. The evacuation had been completed with 20 minutes to spare. Through the station's viewport, she could see the emergency ships jumping to safe distance, their quantum drives creating brief flares against the darkness of space. The wooden puzzle box sat before her, next to the manual activation controls they'd constructed. Its simple presence grounded her in this moment of ultimate complexity. The station's sensors, now stripped down to basic electromagnetic detection, showed the first signs of the Void Weaver's approach. Final evacuation confirmed. Rael's voice came through a simple radio channel. "Sarah, it's not too late to abort." "Actually, it is," Sarah replied, watching as reality began to ripple around the station. "They're already here." The space around Station 09 seemed to fold in on itself. Colors that had no name in any human language flickered through the void. Sarah's unaugmented human mind struggled to process what she was seeing, and perhaps that was her greatest advantage. She began the activation sequence, her hands moving across physical switches and controls. The station's quantum cores spun up, but not in their usual configured patterns. Instead, they created what Dr. Patel had called a quantum chaos cascade, an overwhelming surge of random, complex calculations that would prove irresistible to the Void Weavers. The entities emerged fully into normal space. Through the viewport, Sarah saw them clearly for the first time, massive, shifting forms that seemed to exist in more dimensions than her brain could comprehend. Yet unlike the advanced beings of the Council, whose neural interfaces would have tried to process and understand these impossible geometries, Sarah's human mind simply accepted its limitations. She couldn't understand what she was seeing, and that was okay. "They're magnificent," she whispered into the radio. "Sarah," Vexnor's melodic voice came through. "The quantum readings are exceeding our predictions. The lore is working too well. The station's structural integrity won't matter," Sarah finished, her hands steady on the controls. "Not where we're going." The Void Weavers surrounded the station, their impossible forms drawn to the quantum complexity like moths to a flame. Sarah felt their attention turn to her, the lone organic being in their midst. She sensed their confusion as they tried to interface with her consciousness, expecting the complex neural patterns of an advanced species. Instead, they found something else entirely, a human mind, processing reality through simple electrochemical signals, thinking in patterns that evolved on a single world around a single star. Sarah felt their attempt to consume her consciousness, to break it down into quantum information, and she felt them fail. "You can't digitize the human spirit," she said, though she knew they couldn't understand her words. She reached for the puzzle box with one hand, keeping the other on the final activation switch. "Some things can't be reduced to quantum states." The Void Weavers pressed closer, their confusion turning to something that might have been frustration. The station groaned under dimensional stresses it was never meant to endure. Sarah's time was running out. She looked at the puzzle box one last time, remembering her grandmother's words, "The solution is always simpler than you think." With a smile, she threw the final switch. The quantum cores didn't just activate, they deactivated, but in a precise sequence that created a cascading collapse of dimensional stability. The Void Weavers, drawn in by the promise of complexity, found themselves trapped in a rapidly simplifying space. "Quantum collapse successful," Sarah reported through the radio, her voice steady despite the reality-bending forces around her. "They're being drawn back into their own dimension." But she checked the readings, something's changed. They're not just retreating. They're learning. Through the dimensional tear, Sarah sensed a shift in the Void Weaver's consciousness. They had come seeking complexity, but they had found something else. A species that embraced both complexity and simplicity, that could build quantum computers, but still valued wooden puzzles. In their last moments in normal space, the Void Weavers transmitted a single concept that every being in range could understand: respect. The dimensional rift sealed itself. The station's emergency systems engaged, stabilizing its position in normal space. Sarah slumped in her chair, exhausted but alive. Through the viewport, she watched as the evacuation ships began their return journey. "It worked," she transmitted. "But not the way we expected. I don't think they'll be back, not as enemies at least." They found something more interesting than quantum complexity. They found diversity. In the days that followed, as Station 09 was restored and the Council grappled with the implications of what had happened, Sarah's words proved prophetic. The Void Weavers didn't return to consume. Instead, they began to communicate, not through quantum networks or neural interfaces, but through simple patterns that any species could understand. Humanity had earned its place in galactic society not by matching the technological achievements of ancient civilizations, but by remembering what those civilizations had forgotten. In the end, it wasn't advancement that saved them, but the wisdom to know when to step back, the courage to face the unknown with nothing but their native intelligence, and the understanding that sometimes the simplest solution is the most powerful. Sarah kept the puzzle box. Sometimes, late at night, she would solve it and remember the day when humanity's greatest weakness had proven to be its greatest strength. The day when being primitive had saved the most advanced civilization in the galaxy.